He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall, which I have undertaken for more than 5 decades.
William and Catherine's first outing as king and queen was unfolding perfectly, every moment choreographed, every smile measured, every detail reflecting a quiet sense of renewal. But then something happened that no one expected, something that changed everything. Behind palace doors, whispers had already begun to circulate. King Charles's health had been declining, not suddenly, but gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. What began as quiet fatigue had deepened into something far more serious. The breaking news that came from Buckingham Palace shook the nation to its core. His Majesty, King Charles III, had been diagnosed with cancer. The announcement struck like thunder. Across Britain and the Commonwealth, a hush seemed to settle. For decades, Charles had carried the weight of the crown and the legacy of his mother before him. The long hours, the endless engagements, the pressure to modernize the monarchy, all of it had taken a toll. The doctors were firm. He needed rest. But rest, for a man who had waited his whole life to serve, felt like surrender. That evening, as the autumn wind swept softly through the gardens of Sandringham, the king sat alone in his favorite room, a study lined with history. The fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting gold and amber across the old oak furniture. His desk was piled high with papers, red boxes, and notes for the coming week. But even as he read, the letters blurred, his mind drifting elsewhere. The door creaked open quietly, and in stepped Princess Anne. The king's sister, loyal, steadfast, and sharp as ever, had come without ceremony. She carried no entourage, no fuss, just her quiet strength. "Charles," she said softly, taking a seat beside him, "I've read the doctor's report." He didn't look up at first. His fingers rested on the papers before him. Then he sighed, folding them carefully. "I know what they'll all say, Anne. Rest, recovery. But if I stop now, it will feel like failure." Anne's eyes softened. "Failure," she repeated gently. "Charles, stepping down isn't failure, it's foresight. You've guided Britain through some of its hardest years. You've modernized the monarchy, earned the respect of the public, and upheld Mother's legacy. You've done your duty and more. Now it's time to think about what comes next." He stared into the fire, watching the flames twist and fade. "You mean William?" he murmured. "I do," Anne replied. "William and Catherine, they're ready. The people already see them as the face of the future. If you pass the weight now, while you can still guide them, you give them strength, and you protect yourself." For a long moment, there was silence. The ticking of the mantel clock filled the room. Finally, the king leaned back, his shoulders heavy with years of responsibility. "Perhaps you're right," he whispered at last. "They are ready. The country already sees them that way." 3 days later, under a pale autumn sky, the king summoned his son and daughter-in-law to Sandringham. The gardens were still wet with morning dew, and the golden leaves shimmered across the lawns. Inside, the king waited in his study, the same room where Anne had spoken to him days before. When William and Catherine entered, he rose slowly from his chair. "My dear ones," he began, his voice steady but gentle, "the doctors tell me I must rest. The daily duties of the crown must now pass forward, not because I wish it, but because it is right." William glanced at Catherine, then back at his father. "Father, we'll do whatever is needed," he said, his voice quiet but firm. But we never wanted you to feel replaced." Charles smiled faintly, a rare warmth lighting his tired face. "You won't replace me, my boy. You'll continue me. The monarchy isn't one life. It's a living thread, a legacy that binds us all." Catherine stepped closer, her expression calm, yet deeply moved. "Then we will serve with the same devotion you've shown, Your Majesty, first as family, then as duty." The king took her hand, his fingers trembling slightly. "Then I know Britain is in good hands," he said softly. And in that moment, something in the air shifted, a quiet passing of the torch that no ceremony could capture. Within 48 hours, the news spread across the nation. Buckingham Palace issued an official statement. On medical advice, His Majesty King Charles III has delegated day-to-day royal duties to the Prince and Princess of Wales. This act of continuity is guided by wisdom, unity, and faith. Church bells rang from small towns to great cathedrals. Flags were raised, prayers were whispered, and across the Commonwealth, messages of support poured in. The nation wasn't mourning, it was preparing. Preparations began immediately for a solemn blessing at Westminster Abbey. A moment not of coronation, but of renewal, a shared reign, a bridge between generations. When the day came, the Abbey was radiant with morning light. Sunbeams poured through the ancient stained glass, dancing over the stone floors where centuries of monarchs had walked. The air was filled with quiet reverence. Senior royals, bishops, and state leaders gathered beneath the vaulted arches where Charles himself had been crowned only 2 years earlier. The Archbishop of Canterbury spoke with calm, deliberate grace. "As this crown passes through hands of service," he said, "may it rest upon hearts of duty." His words echoed through the Abbey, carrying both solemnity and hope. Then came the moment that history would remember. Princess Anne stepped forward, her movements calm and precise, holding the newly commissioned Queen Consort's crown, crafted by Garrard & Co., the royal jeweler, since 1735. The light caught the silver and diamonds as she approached Catherine. With a small, reverent bow, Anne presented the crown to her sister-in-law. It was not a grand display, but something quieter, more human, a moment of shared history. The palace later explained that 2 crowns had been made, the main state crown, kept in the Tower of London, and a lighter version for blessings and ceremonies. Catherine wore this lighter crown briefly as she knelt before the Archbishop, her face serene and composed. When she rose, the Abbey bells rang out, their sound filling the air with solemn joy. She wasn't just receiving a crown, one observer whispered. She was accepting a nation's trust. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the towers of Windsor Castle, William and Catherine stepped out for their first public appearance as the future king and queen. The long walk leading up to the castle was lined with thousands, flags waving, flowers in hand, faces filled with hope. It was a moment meant to symbolize continuity, renewal, and the strength of the monarchy. But what began as celebration would soon become something far different, something that would change everything. The moment William and Catherine's convoy turned toward Frimley Park Hospital, the air inside the car grew heavy with silence. Their security team had received the call just minutes earlier. An accident had occurred during the Windsor walkabout. A young girl had fallen in the crowd. The brief message had been calm, but urgent. Now, as blue lights flashed ahead, The gravity of the situation was undeniable. When they arrived, the ambulance had already pulled into the emergency bay. Paramedics rushed through the sliding doors with the stretcher. A small, pale hand peeked out from under the blanket, a hand still clutching a crushed bunch of flowers. Behind her, her mother, Jane Bennet, stumbled forward, pale with fear and disbelief. Her face was streaked with tears, her lips moving in silent prayer as she tried to keep pace with the stretcher. Security teams quickly sealed the entrance as a crowd began to gather. Whispers filled the air, mixing with the distant hum of sirens and camera shutters. Inside, the hospital corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. Nurses hurried past, voices low but tense. The walkabout that had begun as a joyful royal outing had turned into something far different, something heartbreakingly human. When William and Catherine entered, their expressions were grave. Catherine's heels clicked softly on the tiles as Nurse Amelia Hayes stepped forward to greet them. "Your Royal Highnesses," she said, lowering her voice. "The little girl, Rose Bennet, is being examined by Dr. Clark, our lead consultant. Her mother is waiting outside the ward." They followed the nurse down a narrow hallway, lit by fluorescent lights. At the far end, they spotted Jane, pacing, arms tightly folded around herself, her breathing shallow. The moment she looked up and saw them, she froze. For a second, she seemed to forget how to speak. Catherine approached her gently and placed a comforting hand on her arm. "Please, don't get up," she said softly. "We came as soon as we could. How is she?" Jane swallowed hard. They said she hit her head. There was blood. I thought she'd stop breathing." Her voice cracked as the words escaped her. Catherine guided her to a nearby chair. "She's in the best hands," she reassured, her tone calm but filled with empathy. "You did everything right, Jane." William stood beside them, his voice steady but kind. "That must have been terrifying," he said. Jane nodded, gripping the tissue Catherine handed her. "It happened so fast. She saw you both, and she just ran forward. Then the crowd surged, and I couldn't reach her. I kept shouting her name, but—" Catherine's eyes softened. "You don't need to explain," she said gently. She just wanted to share her moment, and her flowers. Jane managed a weak smile through her tears. "She wanted to give them to you. She picked them herself this morning." Catherine's gaze drifted toward the hallway door that led to the emergency room. "Then they're already very special," she whispered. The minutes stretched endlessly. The corridor remained silent except for the muffled sound of voices behind the emergency doors and the steady ticking of a wall clock. It was nearly 45 minutes before the door finally swung open and Dr. Stephen Clark appeared. His expression was calm. "Your Royal Highnesses, Mrs. Bennet," he said. "Thank you for waiting. Rose is stable. She suffered a mild concussion and a few bruises, but no fractures or serious injury. We'll keep her overnight for observation, just to be safe." Jane let out a trembling sigh and pressed her hands to her face. "Thank God," she whispered. Catherine stood, relief washing over her. "Can we see her?" Dr. Clark nodded. "She's awake now, a little tired, but she's asking for her mom." They entered the recovery room quietly. The lights were soft. Machines beeped steadily. Rose lay in bed, her small frame wrapped in a blanket, a bandage on her forehead. Her tiny fingers clutched a stuffed rabbit. When she heard her mother's voice, her eyelids fluttered. "Mommy," she whispered weakly. Jane rushed to her side, tears streaming again. I'm here, darling. You're safe now. Rose blinked slowly, then noticed the familiar figures by the door. Her lips parted into a faint smile. You came. Catherine knelt beside her bed, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Of course we came. You gave us quite a scare, young lady. I wanted to give you my flowers, Rose murmured. Catherine noticed the crushed bouquet on the side table. She picked it up gently. The petals, slightly wilted but still beautiful. And you did, she said softly. They're perfect. Thank you, Rose. William stepped closer, his tone warm. You were very brave, he said. But next time, promise me you'll hold your mum's hand, all right? Rose nodded, her eyelids fluttering. I promise. Jane smiled through her tears. She's been talking about this day for weeks, she said softly. Catherine looked at her, her voice full of tenderness. She's a wonderful little girl. You should be proud. Dr. Clark returned quietly. We'll keep her under observation overnight. She just needs rest. William nodded firmly. Thank you, Doctor. Please make sure every expense is covered. Every test, every treatment. Sir, Dr. Clark began. That's really not— It is, William interrupted, his tone polite but final. Jane blinked in disbelief. Your Highness, you don't have to— Catherine smiled gently. It's already arranged, Jane. You've been through enough. Please, just focus on her. Jane's voice broke. I don't know how to thank you. William gave a faint smile. You already have. The nurse dimmed the lights as Rose's eyes began to close. Can I bring more flowers next time? The little girl murmured drowsily. Catherine smiled. Only if you promise to walk, not run. Rose giggled softly before drifting into sleep. Outside, the world was waiting. Cameras flashed beyond the hospital's glass doors as William and Catherine exited, but they said nothing. Only a brief nod, a calm wave, and then they disappeared into their car. The drive back to Windsor was silent. The moon hung low over the fields. Catherine stared out the window, her reflection faint against the glass. She's so small, she whispered, and she just wanted to give me flowers. William reached over and took her hand. And she did, he said quietly. That's what she'll remember, not the fall, but that we came. Neither spoke again. The hum of the engine filled the car, and the unspoken weight of the moment hung between them. The kind of moment that changes something deep within. By morning, the story had spread everywhere. Windsor walkabout turns emotional. Royals rush to hospital after child falls, read The Guardian. William and Catherine's compassionate response stuns the nation, wrote the Daily Mail. Clips of the incident flooded every social platform. The footage of the ambulance leaving, followed closely by the royal car, played on a loop, shared, replayed, and discussed across millions of screens. Some called it reckless. Others called it leadership. One viral comment read, "They didn't stay for the cameras. They followed a child in need. That's the monarchy we need." Another said, "Protocol matters. The king would never have left mid-event. It's emotional, yes, but not professional." The debate swept across television panels and online forums. Empathy versus protocol, heart versus history. Princess Anne, watching the news from Sandringham, said quietly to her aide, "They did the right thing. Kindness isn't planned. It's felt." By afternoon, Kensington Palace released an official statement, signed by Prince William. Yesterday's events at Windsor were deeply unfortunate. Our thoughts remain with Rose Bennett and her family. We are grateful to the emergency teams for their care and professionalism. While the walkabout did not go as planned, Moments like this remind us what truly matters, the safety and well-being of every person we meet. We are humbled by the kindness shown by so many and remain committed to serving with compassion. The statement went viral within hours, over 1 million shares, countless messages of support. Grace under pressure. One comment read. Another said simply, "This is what modern royalty looks like." The next morning, the royal couple returned quietly to the hospital. No media, no fanfare. Catherine carried a teddy bear. William brought a small basket of flowers. When they entered Rose's room, the girl's face lit up. "You came back," she said, her voice still, soft. "Of course," Catherine smiled. "We promised, didn't we?" Outside, cameras caught just one photo. William and Catherine walking hand in hand, Jane and Rose behind them. It was a simple picture, but it captured everything. When King Charles saw the front-page headlines later that week, he smiled faintly and said to Princess Anne, "They didn't act like royals today. They acted like humans, and that's what the crown needs now." Anne nodded. "They already are the monarchy's future." And so, what began as a day of celebration and turned to fear ended as a quiet lesson in humanity. A reminder that crowns may shine, but compassion is what truly reigns. The sun had barely risen over Windsor when the first pages of the morning papers hit the doorsteps of Britain. Every front page carried the same image: William and Catherine walking out of Frimley Park Hospital with Jane and Rose Bennet. No royal fanfare, no red carpets, just humanity framed in soft autumn light. Across the country, millions read the story over breakfast. For once, it wasn't about scandal or protocol, it was about heart, and about a little girl whose accident reminded an entire nation that even the most powerful titles can bend to compassion. By midday, news anchors replayed the footage from start to finish. The walkabout, the moment of panic, the ambulance's flashing lights, and finally, the royal car following behind. This, one BBC commentator said, wasn't a public relations gesture. It was instinct, the instinct of two people who care. Inside the walls of Buckingham Palace, the tone was far more contemplative. Courtiers spoke in low voices. Some senior advisers worried about how it might look to the press, that the future monarch had left a public event unannounced. But others, especially the younger staff, said it was the most moving thing they'd ever witnessed. Even in Parliament, members on both sides of the aisle spoke briefly of the event, calling it a moment that bridged the gap between crown and commoner. Meanwhile, at Windsor, William and Catherine sat quietly in their private drawing room. The television was muted, but clips of them at the hospital flashed across the screen. Catherine watched for a moment, then turned away. "She looked so small," she said softly, "and so brave. I can't stop thinking about her." William nodded. "Neither can I. But maybe that's the point. Maybe this, all of it, is what service really means. Not the balcony, not the ceremony. Just being there when people need us." Catherine smiled faintly. "That's what your mother believed too." There was a long pause. The air between them carried both pride and humility, the quiet recognition that something inside them had changed. Later that afternoon, a call came through from Sandringham. It was King Charles. His voice, though frail, carried warmth. "My dear boy," he said, "I've seen the footage, the papers, the interviews, all of it." William hesitated. "I wasn't sure what you'd think, sir. Some are saying I broke protocol." Charles chuckled softly. "Protocol?" he said. "I broke plenty in my time. You did what was right. You followed your heart. Never apologize for that. That little girl will remember that moment for the rest of her life, and so will the country." Catherine leaned closer to the speakerphone, her voice tender. "We just did what anyone would do, sir." "No," the king replied. "You did what a true sovereign would do. You cared." For a moment there was silence. Then Charles added quietly, "Your mother would have been proud." The line fell quiet, but those words lingered like a benediction. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, William and Catherine stood together on the balcony of Windsor Castle. The gardens stretched below them, calm and golden. Far in the distance they could hear church bells from the town. "It's strange," Catherine whispered, "how one small accident can remind everyone, even us, that royalty isn't about distance, it's about closeness." William nodded, watching the sky fade into twilight. "Maybe this was our first real test," he said, "not of power, but of purpose." Catherine smiled softly. "And maybe we passed." Over the next few days, letters began arriving at Kensington Palace by the hundreds, handwritten notes from mothers, children, and elderly citizens across Britain. Some enclosed small bunches of flowers, daffodils, tulips, wild daisies, with simple messages like, "For Rose." Others read, "Thank you for showing us what leadership means." One letter stood out. It came from Jane Bennet herself. The envelope was plain, but inside was a short note in careful handwriting. "Your Royal Highnesses, Rose is home now. She's smiling again and keeps her flowers on her bedside table. She told her teacher that a real princess held her hand. I can't explain what that meant to her or to me. You turned fear into hope. Thank you for seeing us, not as faces in a crowd, but as people." Catherine folded the letter slowly, her eyes glistening. "This," she said softly, "is why it matters." William nodded, looking at her. "It's why it always will." And somewhere deep within the quiet halls of Sandringham, King Charles smiled as he looked at a photograph on his desk. The one of William and Catherine walking beside Rose outside the hospital. He turned to Princess Anne, who stood by the window. "I once worried they might inherit the throne too soon," he said quietly. "But after this, I know they're ready. They won't just wear the crown. They'll honor it." Anne nodded. "They already are, Charles." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees. The legacy of the House of Windsor, centuries old, shaped by wars, loss, and duty, now rested in hands that had chosen compassion first. That night, as Britain settled into sleep, one truth lingered, whispered through headlines, conversations, and hearts alike. Royalty isn't defined by the crown, but by the courage to care. What began as a royal walkabout became a test of empathy that redefined what it means to serve the crown. For William and Catherine, it was more than an accident. It was a revelation, a moment that proved that leadership is not measured in titles or ceremonies, but in kindness. So what do you think? Did they make the right choice that day, to leave the crowd and follow the ambulance? Or should they have stayed to continue the royal duty? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the heart behind the crown.